Everybody is very welcome on yet another busy day in the world of the WPATH files. Um, we've been extraordinary lucky to have such good numbers. I thought there was only 800, but there was over 1,000 people last week, and there was well over 2,000 the week before. So we've had phenomenal numbers between all the live streaming, all the different platforms. So everybody's very welcome to this third webinar about the WPATH files. The focus today is on the doctors, and we're going to go around and introduce the doctors and the physicians in a moment. But first of all, I just want to hear Carrie and Mia's thoughts about the kerfuffle today, because it was all very exciting. WPATH was exciting today.
Go first?
Yeah, go on.
So a lot of it happened before I even got myself out of bed and ready, and all the excitement was underway. There was the website. Everything had disappeared from the website. I didn't really know what to make of it. I've learned my lesson not to jump the gun, not to jump to conclusions, and to just wait and see what's really going on. So I stayed quiet publicly. I didn't say anything. I did find, you see, that there was a statement or an internal Marcy Bowers statement, right, that then surfaced, but that's from, I believe, last week. I did find that rather amusing because there was about my report was it called my report darkly drafted, I think was the wording. Marcy said that the WPATH Files report was darkly drafted and then dismissed it as being misinformation and actually cited Erin Reed. So we've got a supposedly world professional healthcare group citing a non-medical trans activist who I tried to go through what Erin said about my report, and the errors that he was pointing out just were not errors. They just weren't errors. And he said he found 216, and he shared about 15 of them, and none of them were really errors. And I don't know what the others even are. So yeah, it's been yet another eventful day in the life of the WPATH files. What did you make of it, Carrie?
Similar. I mean, I just was struck as a physician that memo or letter that Marcy Bowers wrote, from last week, as you said, was really that same theme of, attacking people instead of discussing the substance or acknowledging, that there are concerns. And so that activist style of engaging with, criticism or concerns around health issues is really alarming to all of us as physicians, because it's safety first. And then, of course, quoting Erin Reed is not a physician. And again, you pointed out her criticism, but it was talking about your report. She, to my knowledge, didn't get into the substance of the files or the vignettes, talking about medical actual issues. So again, for WPATH, the leader, to cite that seems, not where we want everything to go in terms of safety and quality concerns. So yeah, that was shocking. But
yeah. I was there more in real time because it was happening early. I'm 5 hours ahead or 4 hours, whatever, ahead of you. And it was very exciting. But I did think this is so out of character that their website suddenly reverted to 2019. And I'm like, this crowd don't back down. They brazen out. You know what I mean? That's their calling card, is being brazen in the face of, and as you said, Carrie, using words and evocative statements and then declaring it scientific. It's very double speak, and it's very discombobulating. But it was classic. But they do seem to be rattled very much, I'd say, by the WPATH files. Their slightly frantic message on their homepage saying, please be advised, our website is currently experiencing an internal system issue, and we are currently working to restore it. In capital letters, it does look slightly panicked, and so they should be. I think they've been revealed by Mia's report and by Michael Shellenberger's work and the internal files they've been revealed to be an extraordinarily harmful organization that are not scientific, they're not medical. And we're going to talk to the medics tonight to discuss exactly that. What we might do is go around, first of all, maybe Eithan, then Mark, Laurie, and then over to Roy. Just a quick introduction, because I want to hear a little bit from Roy before he has to leave. So if you, first of all, Eithan, just introduce yourself and then we'll move on.
Yeah. Hi there, everyone. Thanks for letting me be a part of it. My name is Eithan Haim. I'm the whistleblower from Texas Children's Hospital. It's a privilege to be a part of it. Just a disclaimer, too, that I'm on call. So I might have to just mute my video just to take a phone call. And if a trauma comes in, I might have to leave abruptly. But just FYI. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Mark?
Mark Buchanan. I'm a retired physician, but in my retirement, I teach medical ethics at a school in the Northeast, which for the moment I think shall remain nameless. And I've encountered all sorts of interesting adventures in trying to introduce some, shall I say, different voices on the issue of trans care for youth.
Great. I can't wait to hear some of the things you said. We had Eithan on the podcast, so I know your story, but I can't wait to hear about the medical ethics, because I think actually medical ethics are going to be the issue of the 21st century. I really think it's as hot. It used to be for me in Ireland, Catholic Ireland, medical ethics equaled abortion, but now it equals everything. There's so many other issues, so we'll get more into that later. Laurie, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Laurie Regan-Streif. I'm a Canadian physician working in Ontario, and I do quite a bit of evidence review for continuing education for other family physicians and a lot of mentoring of other family physicians. And I actually have become a member of WPATH about 3 or 4 years ago because I had done an evidence review it wasn't for gender affirming care at the time, it was for care of transgender adults. And when we went into the evidence review, I realized that I needed to know more. So I joined the listserv thinking that I would learn more, all the inside stuff that maybe wasn't getting published.
Yeah. There's so much research that has been out since then. It's extraordinary. It's like we've got so much information finally. None of it long term, most of it short term, but some of it really is high quality. And we have Cass, just in case any of us think we're going to be relaxing for the next few weeks, we have Cass on the way. So that's going to be a suite of research that we'll be able to use, independent research that we can look forward to. So Roy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and take the floor, because I know you're going to be leaving soon.
So I'm Roy Eithan. I'm an endocrinologist in Montreal. I'm associated with the university, which will also remain nameless for the instant. And I've written a number of articles in the Wall Street Journal and a couple of other places. My initial concern was the guidelines from both the Endocrine Society and the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I belong to a group called Do No Harm. And we're a medical watchdog organization, and we went to the Endocrine Society and we set up a booth and we started talking to endocrinologists from all over the world. And when we were telling them what was going on with gender care in children, many of them were on our side. They thought that this was very unusual that people were doing these kind of things. And so we wrote an article about that experience in the Wall Street Journal. And for some inexplicable reason, the president of the Endocrine Society decided to reply to me and say that I didn't know what I was talking about. So which gave us an opportunity to reply and say, there are multiple systematic reviews saying that the evidence for all of these things is poor. And then there was an article from 21 endocrinologists and other specialists from around the world agreeing with us. And I think the WPATH files have sort of confirmed what I thought was going on, but it's even more shocking than that. It's shocking in the sense that they know these problems are there and they don't really seem to care much about them. They know that the informed consent is a real problem with these children. I mean, some of the comments that were made, it's like talking to kids before they've actually even taken a high school biology course and then asking them whether or not they want to be infertile. They talk about, children not ever having an orgasm. I mean, these are things that are basic to humanity, and it's sort of shocking that they say these things and rather flippantly. So, the WPATH files, I think, have revealed that this is not a scientific organization, but it is indeed an organization which has a scientific veneer, a scientific beard, and is really an activist organization. And they have their own activist agenda, which is not the best interest of the children.
I think that's such an important point, that this does not feel like the clinicians in these reports have the best interests. Did you feel that, Mia, when you were writing it up? Because you're kind of the expert for life on the WPATH files.
I mean, there's a complete lack of concern for all of the terrible side effects, the debilitating vaginal atrophy, the males who are suffering from terrible sexual issues. There's just nobody shows any concern whatsoever for their iatrogenic effects, right? Like, these people are the ones causing the medical treatment itself is causing all of these problems, and yet all that you see in the files is these people just guessing how to deal with it. What can we do? Oh, I tried this. They're just improvising. They're just experimenting. And as far as I could see, nobody shows even the slightest concern for the actual long-term health and well-being of their patients.
And Roy, did you say that you tried to work with the Endocrine Society, and what is your feeling, that how will they be feeling now? Because if I was them, I'd be professionally embarrassed.
So just recently, the Endocrine Society announced they were setting up a new guidelines committee. They've been promising this for quite some time. The last guidelines were set up in 2017. And the head of the new guidelines committee is a doctor from Mount Sinai who is enmeshed in WPATH. And it will be interesting. I don't know who all the other members are, but it's going to be interesting to see if these members are all going to be involved with WPATH as well. WPATH basically has written the guidelines for both the Endocrine Society and the AAP, essentially. There were 6 members of WPATH on the Endocrine Society 2017 guidelines. And it's going to be, if the Endocrine Society and the American Academy of Pediatrics Society are smart, they will distance themselves from these members of their committee and get actual members of their large communities to get involved in this and publish real guidelines, which the guidelines should say that we probably shouldn't do most of these things in children, as our European colleagues are saying now.
Yeah. What do you think, Carrie? Do you think that the Endocrine Society will change, what's the word, their horses in midstream?
Well, gosh, yeah, it's a conundrum, right? I mean, we've all been working towards, raising awareness, putting pressure on them, as Roy eloquently said, to have more balanced committees, not to just blindly follow, WPATH, which clearly is activist organization. So I don't know. I do, as probably most of our audience knows, the American Academy of Pediatrics is being sued. And, I wonder how the WPATH files will impact, what lawyers are looking into as really kind of, I'm not using the proper legal terms, but almost like a coercive environment, where because WPATH has got control over these associations who are all saying the same thing, and that's been impacting a lot of impacting care across our country in the United States. I think to answer your question, I think if there's, you know, a legal lever here to pull, I think that's probably gonna be quite impactful. I don't know if the other physicians have thoughts on that. So how to move the association, so to speak.
Well, yeah, unmute yourself, maybe, Mark. You look like you've thoughts.
Yeah, in preparation for this talk, I trolled around the web a little bit. I looked at the websites for organizations that have depended on WPATH in the past to see if they were posting any notice that they might be taking another look. So I went to the American Psychiatric Association, the Academy of Pediatrics, the Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychology, didn't find anything. And, you know, maybe they just don't know. You know, there's a universe of what I'd call news aggregators for doctors. There's Medscape, Kaiser Family Foundation, Health News, Modern Healthcare. And I looked at some of these and see that typically they've done 10 or 15 articles on gender dysphoria and treatment of it in the last 12 or 15 months. So they might be sort of interested. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Wow. I think from what everybody is talking about, I'd be interested in what Laurie or Eithan has to say about this. To reverse medical protocols appears to be a very difficult thing to do. You might know better. What do you think, Eithan?
Yeah, you know, I think that it's really, there's an interesting correlation to an important event in the past. You know, when I was going through the WPATH files, you know, it seemed to me that WPATH was kind of emerging as like this cartel of medical negligence, where they launder their phony, bogus recommendations through their members to other organizations. So you have, like, for example, Dr. Satterwhite, the guy who owns this big surgical clinic in California, a member of WPATH, who also sits on the recommendation board for the Endocrine Society. So you have their recommendations being laundered to other organizations. But when you look at the WPATH files, one thing that really stands out is you have this internal sense of hesitancy behind closed doors where they're really expressing these major issues with the interventions they're pursuing. And this contrasts so heavily to their public expressions of authoritative control, like of confidence. And what this relates to in the past is what you saw with opioids, where behind closed doors, these people were really questioning, like, we're giving an entire generation of people these addictive medications. Like, should we really be doing this? You had people in the Sackler family being like, oh, you know, is this a good idea? But those private expressions of hesitancy were stored away, and then on the public facing organization said, no, this is safe, this is effective, these are the protocols. They used their recommendations that they developed that were phony and bogus, and they laundered them into all the other medical societies so that they create this perception of consensus. And when people speak up, like, I remember Dr. Mendoza, I remember the first time we spoke, you know, you told me stories about how you would challenge this idea of giving people these powerful opioids, but you would get so much pushback because there was this false appearance of consensus. And the question is, how do we break this internal consistency, like this internal mechanism of control? And the one thing we learned with the opioid epidemic is that it was broken once criminal prosecutions began to occur. And I think that, especially with WPATH files, especially with everything we're learning, that has to be the next route. Because when these people understand that if they're going to mutilate and castrate, sterilize these children, if there's going to be a possibility of prison time, they're going to definitely think twice about that. It's just like with the opioid epidemic too.
And as a matter of interest, all of you, I don't know, maybe not yourself, Eithan, but the rest of you, I presume, worked during the opioid epidemic. You just look very fresh-faced.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine the rest of you worked during. I know I know you did, Carrie. But how much was it among? Were people talking? Were people having webinars like we were about the opioid epidemic in front of me? Because there was an unfolding medical scandal. Were people talking about it? Unmute yourself, maybe, Laurie, if you've got something to say about it. Was it in the conversation among doctors?
There was definitely a parallel. I'm going back to the early 2000s now, where a newbie doctor or somebody just coming into, let's say they're just coming into practice, general practice, and they're seeing lots of people with back pain or some kind of routine chronic pain presentation who seem to be persistently needing or wanting to have an opioid. And the general, like, a new doctor coming in might think, oh, I'm really not familiar with this. I'm going to call up a pain specialist, or I'm going to turn to my pain mentor and ask them. And that's as Stephen Levine talks about, the chain of trust, where you would turn to a more senior physician and ask them, what would you do about this case? I have this case. I'm really not sure what to do with it. This person's starting to use a lot of opioids and so on. So there was that kind of picture. But what we see, I think, here, and what we're actually seeing this with our second opioid crisis, which we're running into in Canada, is the juniors, like the junior, they may be physicians, or they may even be social workers or non-experts with lived experience, or counselors who are telling the doctors what to do. So this is a unique experience in Canada, where short-acting opioids like hydromorphone are now being prescribed to people as a safer supply to replace the toxic fentanyl supply. But what we're finding now is it's almost a reverse chain, where juniors are telling the physicians or their mentors or their teachers how to talk about it, what to say, what to do, how to prescribe. I've sat and watched a 1-year physician tell a 15 or 20-year physician how to prescribe hydromorphone tablets to somebody who's injecting fentanyl, and my jaw was on the floor. So it's flipped in some ways. But it's also similar in the sense that when people started to get uncomfortable, they weren't always sure where to turn. Who do I ask? Because these are the people promoting pain medication and telling me I should be managing this fifth vital sign. And yet I'm feeling uncomfortable managing this fifth vital sign for this particular patient. And a lot of physicians feeling isolated in their own little clinic with their own little problems, not realizing that there were parallel experiences going on for many other physicians in their clinics as well, with their questions about the opioids and not knowing what to do. So maybe more isolated than this.
It's so similar. Before, I would like to catch Roy before you have to go, because I know you have to go, but I do want to hear what Mia says afterwards about medical scandals, because I know you make a lot of parallels. But Roy, what would you have to say before you go? Because I know you have to go, about, let's say, the opioid or the parallels around what's going on here.
So we're actually going through a new opioid crisis in Canada. The government has gotten into this, especially in one of our provinces, British Columbia, into this harm reduction thing, which I think is actually sort of similar to this whole crisis in the gender treatment for children, in that they're now giving out huge amounts of hydromorphone to people who are supposed to use it, but instead they sell it, and then those tablets are sold now to children and other people. So again, the government seems to want to do some good stuff, but doesn't know how to. I mean, I think what we seem to have forgotten that, our primary duty is to protect our children.
Wow. It's frightening, really. Thank you very much for your contribution, and thanks for being able to join up. Mia, what do you make of all that? Because you've really studied the scandals, and afterwards we might go to yourself, Carrie. Thank you very much, Roy. About the not only the opioid, but what you were talking about, medical marijuana. And there's more than one crisis going on. There's overprescription of children in general. There's over-medicating of children in general. But first of all, Mia, what do you make of all that?
Well, I actually have a question for the doctors who are present. So, because I've been looking into this, I don't know if I've talked about this in a podcast recently. I'm not sure which one, where I do have that. When I read about the harm that these doctors are doing, and when I listen to the stories of detransitioners, I do feel that really strong impulse that these people belong behind bars, that we need to lock them up. And so I was looking into past scandals, trying to find if there were any instances where doctors were actually criminally charged. And so I did find that the hormone therapy scandal that I wrote about in the report, when they were trying to correct the height of tall girls and short boys, the short boy scandal, when they were giving them human growth hormone and it was contaminated with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and then many of the kids ended up dying of this horrible brain wasting disease. And in France, I think 4 or 5 doctors were criminally charged with manslaughter because they continued to prescribe the human growth hormone after they were aware of the CJD risk. They were found guilty, but they were given suspended sentences. And then the only other instance I found was in the East German doping scandal, when they were giving the teenage girls testosterone in pill form, but they were telling them that it was vitamins. They weren't telling them that it was testosterone. And those doctors were criminally charged with causing bodily harm to a minor. And I think they did end up in prison. It's a different place. And then opioid, to me, is the criminal element was prescription fraud. Am I right? It was not causing harm to the patients, but it was illegally writing prescriptions to addicts. So is there another aspect of have I missed anything, or did I get that wrong about opioids? It's very rare that doctors face criminal charges, right?
I think a good example, potential way to pursue this forward is the story of Dr. Death in Dallas. He was a neurosurgeon in Dallas who operated on people where there were no indications. So, if someone had a back issue or a spine issue, he would take them to the operating room, implant hardware that didn't need to be implanted. He operated on his best friend who ended up, suffering just severe complications. And he's in prison right now. So if I were to operate on someone tomorrow, they came into my clinic and they say, I want my arm chopped off because I believe I was born disabled, I would go to prison. There's no doubt about that. So the laws are already on the books, but there's this Overton window that's been shifted, and we just allowed this criminal behavior to persist, but because it's that Overton window that's shifted.
Wow. And don't forget, we're taking Q&A and we will address them in the second half of the webinar. Could each of you comment on Mia's question? Because I think it's a really powerful and important question to address. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me jump in. Another doctor who's in prison serving life without parole is Kermit Gosnell, who was the abortion provider of last resort in Philadelphia. And he practiced in a very, very pro-choice environment. The governor protected him. But he was convicted of delivering or aborting babies who were well past the 24-week line. And if they were born breathing, he would take a pair of scissors and snip their spinal cord, instantly killing them. He did that on several occasions. He also negligently killed one of the women who came in for an abortion. That is certainly the outlier. You think about other scandals, think of all the lobotomies that were done. I don't believe anybody went to prison for doing lobotomies. It just sort of fell out of favor, maybe because Thorazine came in to replace it. Or the ongoing scandal at Tuskegee with the syphilis experiments. Nobody went to prison. I don't think anybody lost their license. Nobody was disciplined. It all just sort of got buried along with the victims of the study.
Wow, that is so
I'm
funny.
going to
Yeah.
add to that because one of the things that I think I remember this really well, Carrie, you've brought it up, I think, is that you were given, pain scales, for example, and the expectation was for you guys for different reasons. You have more of a consumer-driven situation where ours is more about service and quality or whatever you want to call it. But your goal was to get them to a 4 or a 5 on the smiley face scale. Basically the very first emojis were probably invented by Purdue. Yeah. And these were then put into, above people's bedsides after surgery and the post-op spaces and so on. And the expectation as a physician prescribing, though, was, as you can imagine, to do a good job, which was to make the patient a 4 or a 5. So to be fair, there's a huge number of physicians out there, I believe, and having come from, I'm now in exile from a Facebook Women in Medicine page in Canada, I can see exactly how they function. They don't know what they're doing. They ask someone else. Someone else says, well, I did it this way the last time that came my way. Kind of not unlike what I saw in the listserv, the WPATH listserv, but a real case of the blind leading the blind. But they genuinely, most of them think they're like on a mission to save this sort of out of the blue marginalized subgroup of humans that have suddenly appeared on the planet. And before, well, they were all under a rock crying or something. We know that they weren't all committing suicide because we don't have those numbers. But I think many of the what we would call the middle management, I suppose, really think they're doing the right thing. I've certainly had conversations with colleagues who are all in on this, and they just don't know anything else. That most of them are very new. They didn't live through the opioid crisis. Those are the ones that are doing the harm reduction prescribing that Roy was talking about in Canada, the safer supply. They're young. They're a psychologist in Toronto once wrote an article that was very controversial, got him into a lot of trouble. Something about their Chelsea boots, wearing Chelsea boots. Now we all wear a lot, these Blundstones, right? We all wear them, but she was riding a bike in her Chelsea boots, and it was talking about interviewing a physician who was doing this work. But what he was trying to say really is that it's a sort of a social justice, component of medicine that is really attracting a lot of new doctors. And so it's being now taught to first-year medical students that this is the right way to deliver care, which is where it gets, a little bit nerve-wracking to watch.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, when it's so pervasive, it's not like you're going to see, entire hospital executives and entire, medical groups going to jail. It's what it has happened is, and it happened in the opioid crisis, that it got built into the regulations in the states. And then they have all these, business mechanisms of the way medicine's run here. So what Lori was saying, like your patient experience scores or what patient feedback has been given about you can be part of a formula of what your like bonus will be. So that stuff like that should be illegal, but it's like that's part of the mechanism that I think was this culture of doctors kind of just the force to say yes to things that when they started questioning the immense force of the regulatory state upon them, they would just figure out like, well, maybe I'll just write a few pills. This is like from the ER, which is obviously, different than if you're in the doctor's office. But, just the vast regulatory state had built into it that, pain control was a quality metric, and it was how the hospital and doctors groups did was based on reimbursements. So you can see how it all got scaled up. But I never saw, so the AMA never apologized about the opioid crisis. They had a big hand in it because they partnered with Purdue Pharma on some quality metric studies early on around like 2000, and that then blossomed into these other things that got built into the regulations. And, so what I did see, of course, what impacted me was more when the patients got angry, and it was scary. Like, I had to have security to walk me out to my car a few times after shifts because these people were addicts. And when you say no to them, which I did, so I never wrote inappropriate scripts, saying no, that people would get so enraged, and there have been doctors that have gotten shot because they wouldn't, refill prescriptions. But I never saw, anyone at the level of like continuing to enforce the regulations, ever apologize or get called into questions. Kind of like the housing market crash that happened, right? There were a lot of those people never again, were at all held account. So, I mean, I haven't, seen that. And I think with the gender issue, it's so pervasive, built into regulations. It's like asking someone's gender is like the sixth vital sign now, right? It's built into the electronic health record.
For now.
Yeah, right. For now, I'm working on that. But I mean, it's so pervasive. So I think that the lawsuits are going to help bring it down, like we've talked about, which happened with the opioid crisis. Prescription drug monitoring definitely came in there before the first lawsuits, which gave doctors what I call digital moral courage. They could say, well, I looked in the computer and it says XYZ. And they had a reason to like push back on the people asking for prescriptions. So I feel that's kind of a policy thing that's going to need to happen with this, because we need to figure out policy levers that a lot of these clinicians out there feel they need to say no, basically, and we need to help figure that out.
I'd like to reiterate, anybody listening, and there's many, many people listening in the various platforms, we can do our bit by writing to our local clinic and saying, I see you have the WPATH files on your references and they have been discredited. Take a look at this file. Take a look at, Mia's report. Put them on the back foot, with your own letters. We're going to do a campaign anyway with Genspect and help people out on that, but I think anybody can write that in. I do want to say, there was a big scandal in Ireland. I'm thinking of a certain, Irish surgeon that's kind of infamous in gender circles, Sive Gallagher. And she's Irish and she's making a mint clearly in America. But there was another, funnily enough, she's from, as far as I know, she's from County Louth or somewhere near there. And there was a very famous scandal of a surgeon in County Louth, a different surgeon, Dr. Michael Neary, and he removed the womb of 129 women straight after. Yeah, he was obviously some form of a psychopath. So generally it was straight after delivery of having a baby. And he got struck off, but it took a long time for him to get struck off. And then he retired in full pension, ended over in a £500,000, pound villa in Spain, then ended up coming back to Ireland. And it was like, this is in real time. He's still alive, as far as I know, in Ireland. So, Eithan, the surgeons, what's the conversations around the fact that Sive is there on TikTok eating the teats and stuff like that? Do people bring it up? Or like, what would happen if you brought it up to other surgeons?
We would bring it up, but we would find quiet corners of the hospital that we can, escape away to and talk about these things, because there's such a pervasive culture of censorship that prevents any of this from being brought up. And you don't even have to explain why. Everyone knows that if you do talk about it, there's a good chance you're going to have severe repercussions at your job. Either you're going to get fired, you're not going to get promoted, and then you're going to get fired. You're not going to get published. You're going to get ostracized within your job. I mean, it's hard to overstate how little conversation happens in these academic medical centers. The only conversations that happen are how to promote it, how to integrate it, and how to further its goals. The conversations are never directed towards, is this a good idea? Because at that point, it's already been accepted. And then when you have anyone who even questions it, they're being gaslighted into believing that there is this consensus that already exists. And when you atomize the individual, when you isolate them, then they don't feel confident to express these things publicly. But I believe that if you had even a few people who are willing to during these meetings, more people would start speaking up, because inherently all of us know this is wrong. Even the people who are doing it know it's wrong, but in many ways they've gone too far down that road that if they express any type of self-reflection, they will come to the conclusion that they were the ones who are harming these children the most, and they were doing it for their own self-righteousness.
Wow. What would the medical ethicists say, Mark?
Well, I certainly have seen that in my own institution. About 5 years ago, I saw some things that were being taught about gender medicine that kind of didn't make sense to me. I didn't really know anything about the field at the time. So using the internal school email, I sent a message to a tenured professor who was near the end of his career saying, hey, you're a specialist in this area. What do you think? The reply was, maybe we should have this conversation in person rather than by email. And then I know another person who works in the sort of pediatric adolescent mental health delivery system of a nearby institution who said, yeah, I don't buy any of that stuff. I don't do it myself. In fact, I talk to peers about it, and they'll say the same thing. They'll say, yeah, I agree with you, but you can't say that here.
Well, what's the protocol? Imagine if you're somebody and you're saying, I don't buy this, and then the patient is in front of you and they're seeking a mastectomy and they're seeking your kind of say-so. How does can a doctor be a conscientious objector in that context?
Well, that depends. The legislature of Connecticut is currently looking at a bill. They have this non-discrimination bill right now where you can't discriminate against people for, it's the usual, it's race, sex. And it says, so for purposes of this, sex means sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and it means medical care given for that. So there are no age restrictions on that. So as I read the bill, it would mean that you must offer gender-affirming care to kids of any age without any input from their parents and with no right of conscience, or forget conscience. What about medical opinion? Suppose your medical opinion is that this would be bad care, but the hope of some is to make that illegal in our state.
Wow. Any comments on that? I might go to some of the Q&A because there's a few come in. Do you want to make any comment on that, Mia or Carrie?
No, I just think it's just there's again a culture and legislation through like the civil rights channels that the activists have gotten into to enforce their policy prescriptions, but it's butt up against ethical, safe care. And the thought in medicine that you can't speak up about a safety issue is just the opposite of everything that we learn and is about, at least like in the hospital, the way I practice in my environment, everything is about safety. So to think that there's a section of healthcare that's carved out away from people being able to raise concerns is just so distressing. And again, to take it back to the files, as was said, there's the public face versus the internal, where there's just questions, people asking questions about the basic fundamental medical decision making on these cases that they're acting publicly that they know all the answers to, but yet internally they're asking basic questions like, how do I care for this patient? What am I supposed to do? When is the right time for surgery? Those are huge red flags.
And, if I could add one thing to that too, when you look at the conference in the WPATH files, the one case that I believe could be made towards potential criminal medical negligence is when you have them expressing their concerns, right, about the effects of puberty blockers causing like menopause-like symptoms, stealing the sexual development of these kids, like Dr. Metzger said, or people with psychiatric issues that really affect their daily living. But in each case, instead of demonstrating like this cautious behavior that a doctor should be inherent in any doctor, they just go more into medications, surgery. So instead of being cautious when a problem exists, when a challenge exists, which is the fundamental principle in medicine and surgery, is like when you're faced with an unknown, the first thing you should do is be cautious, to do less, to not do anything invasive. But in every case where there's a challenge or something that they didn't expect, they go every time into more and more powerful medications. Like one of the younger, I think she was an endocrinologist. Yeah, she's like, oh yeah, well this person has all these issues. We'll just do spironolactone. We'll just do that. Instead of being like, how about we pause, right?
Yeah.
And that in itself is criminal negligence. I mean, that's, if I did that, I would lose my license. Because it's so obvious. And here we have a video of them saying it themselves. And that's what struck me when I was going through. It was so profoundly shocking that it's like, man, you have these people who they're just saying it openly. And it counters so much what they say publicly that it's almost unbelievable. But these days, the unbelievable is what has become the norm.
And you could almost ring the police on them and say, this video shows that they're, you know what I mean? This is negligent. Some of the questions are, oh, Mia, come on in, because some of the questions are interesting as well, but come on in, and Laurie too.
I'm going to repeat myself from what I said, I think it was last week, that those clinicians, those panel members are apparently the internal heroes of WPATH. So Benjamin Ryan did that great piece about the WPATH files and actually got statements from inside WPATH, and Laura Edwards-Leeper told Benjamin Ryan that the panel members are the heroes. They are the internal heroes. They were grappling with the ethical dilemmas of treating this difficult patient cohort, and they were advocating for the better, appropriate, more appropriate care. And that would, I think I said it last week, that would work if they were not actually placing these kids onto this experimental and irreversible medical treatment that they are actually talking about. If they were inside WPATH calling for an immediate end to this crazy experiment that they obviously know is doing harm, then sure, they'd be the heroes. But they're saying all this stuff, they see all the problems exactly the way we see them, and then they carry on business as usual.
Horrifying. It's literally horrifying. Do you want to comment before we go to questions, Laurie?
No, I had a comment about something that's like 3 topics back, but I'm fine for now. I'll wait and see if it comes back. No, it's fine. I'm good.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, go for it. There's
no,
so many things to say.
It was about what Eithan was saying about well, who was saying it, or maybe Carrie, about they came along all the regulation that happened after they kind of decided to kind of come down on the opioid prescribing, because you were talking about random prescribing and pill mills and physicians doing that, but some of it was just very patient driven, which is very familiar to us in this conversation, where the patient is deciding and directing the physician. And that's what's happening with the safe supply maneuver now, as people are coming in saying, well, 30 hydromorphone tablets a day is not enough for me. I need 35. And then a week or two later, I need 40. Those are 8 milligram tablets for my doctor colleagues. And those would be a day that are dispensed to people. So what happened in Canada and also in the States is we had new guidelines that came out that said, okay, well, you can only prescribe for chronic pain up to 90 milligrams. That's the cutoff. So then they started tapering people, and physicians were forcing patients to bring their doses down, often in the hundreds of milligrams of morphine equivalents a day, down to under 90. And then I was part of a mentoring group that was helping physicians who had been disciplined. And so they would reach out to me and say, I don't know what to do. I can't get this person under 120. They're going to come after me and take my license. And all of that was happening. And it was becoming impossible. People were kind of cornered. And then all of a sudden, a new movement came along and said, no. People have a right to their euphoria. We need to be giving them these safe pills so they don't overdose on that dangerous fentanyl that's out there in the street. And it's very similar to the narrative of, no, we have to do this because it's life-saving. This is a life-saving intervention because we believe it is. And so what happened was there was a swing towards tightening down and clamping down on physicians. That happened in about 2010s. And then suddenly we've swung, and this is only happening in Canada. It hasn't happened in the States yet. You can cross your fingers that it doesn't. This giant harm reduction movement that's now making it widely available. So it's now very patient driven again. So we've gone back towards what we've been looking at here with the patient decides what's life-saving for them.
Yeah, I've said it a million times. I'm sure Mia and Carrie are yawning, but like it's moved from patient-centered to patient-led, and it's dangerous. It's consumer-driven. It's acting as if medicine is a shop where you buy your services. But some of these questions are very interesting. One, see if anybody has an answer to this. Is there any evidence historically that a change in government at the federal level will slow or temper the spread of the ideology? Anybody?
I think there definitely is. I know through people I've been in contact with, just through the nature of my case, that there's already policies being put in place that will prevent this from happening, prevent the spread, holding these people accountable. And for these children who are being sucked into this world, there's nothing more important than that. So I do believe, but then I also think that there's another really interesting historical correlation, and you see that I don't think there's many, it's not necessarily medical, but rather legal. When you had, mobs in like the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and then after that, when there was such a challenge to prosecute them, to try to tie these organizations together, it was a federal-led effort in order to create RICO statutes in order to tackle this very challenging issue of criminal organizations. And so there is precedent with if you have the right administration, the right federal policy, you can craft, federal, legal statutes that can hold these people accountable. So I think that really is an important thing.
Whoa, that's very, very interesting. I didn't know that. I love this question, and as somebody said, it's a fascinating and depressing conversation. I do think it is a little fascinating and depressing, but also incredibly necessary. I'm just thrilled to have actual doctors who are working on the ground. I think there's something so important for this. But one question comes in: universities and the newly graduated cohort. Oh, it's jumped. Of course, it's jumped. It's asking about the universities. Let me see a sec. Universities, the newly graduated cohort of physicians appear to be the root of the belief system that underpins this movement, which is a belief that in the idea that it is imperative or best to medically modify the body to match the psyche. How do we stop the ideas and universities? Now, I know that's not how to ask, probably don't have to ask the doctors, but I think it's an interesting. Mark, do you want to take it away? And anybody else, just unmute yourself. I think it's true. I think when you start studying gender, you realize you end up in universities and in academia and shoddy research. The dog agrees.
Well, most of my teaching is with first and second year students, so they are fresh out of university. And it's very clear that they've imbibed several strains. Many of them have taken gender courses. Many of them have a sort of a social justice orientation, and they see receiving gender affirming care as a civil right. And once you make it a civil right, then issues like, does it work? Does it actually reduce suicide? What does it do to depression? What's the 10-year complication rate? Become sort of irrelevant because it is a civil right. And there's also a great deal of identitarian feeling. I was trying to develop a 15-hour course on gender medicine, and some of the more activist students told me that as a cis hetero male, I'm really the wrong person to be teaching this course. Or if I did presume to teach it, I should only teach the affirming model.
Mark, how many students are receptive to skepticism? Are there any, or do they come to you privately?
I don't think most of them know who I am or where I am. When I teach my ethics course, which is not focused on gender medicine, I often ask the students afterwards, so how's your experience been in the school? Do you feel free to bring things up? And many of them say, well, I'm okay discussing controversial things with my classmates, but I wouldn't bring them up with administration and faculty. And others say, when I hear things that I cannot agree with, I tend to just let them pass because the social cost of saying something is too much.
Wow. It's frightening.
I would just add to that I have a close colleague across the country who teaches psychiatry residents and has recently been put on some form of probation and all kinds of disciplining or possible disciplining for teaching about exactly this. And absolutely, I would say it's the minority of whether they're of learners. So whether it's medical students or residents, it's absolutely the minority that are willing or even that are able to think that critically. That's my impression, but I'm only working in one sort of circle and hearing from a few other circles, so I don't know how it works across the states. But my sense in Canada is it absolutely the dominant narrative is the one that we're all sitting here and questioning.
I'm in a different region because I'm, in Ireland, and I often give more and more and more. I get booked to give talks to clinicians, to kind of, third year counseling students, to kind of groups effectively that work in psychology. And I'm finding the ground is very soft and they're very open. There will always be one or two fervent, but generally a huge amount of psychologically oriented. So I think it's a good deal different in England and Ireland than it would be in America and Canada. I can feel people saying, no shit, Stella.
Well, Stella, I do read about all sorts of people getting canceled when they try to go into universities to express a wider view. Many of them trying to assert women's rights for private spaces, for instance. And, it may cause a riot or they get canceled at some of the most prestigious universities.
Yeah. And this is happening. So it's quite almost schizophrenic because this is happening. And then I'm giving these webinars and I'm finding it very easy. It feels like it's very definitely driven by if there's an active trans activist in the university or is loud in the faculty, they rule. I've got a good friend who's working in a university and effectively an activist has joined the department and has absolutely transformed the place since the activists started in September. Absolutely transformed what was an easygoing place to being a fraught, conflict-ridden, filled with. So yeah, I think it very much depends, and I'm probably being booked by people who are just quietly just booking me. So it's dependent, you know.
And I have read 2 books recently that I would strongly recommend for anybody who wants to understand this interaction between younger medical trainees and medical students and the older faculty, or take it to corporations. They're, 20, 30 something employees versus senior management. Greg Lukianoff is involved in both of them. The first is the coddling of the American mind, and the second is the canceling of the American mind.
Oh, I haven't read the second one. I have read Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation. I think it's coming out next week. I did a review of it. Oh my God, it's frightening and truthful.
I'd also recommend, in the context of tonight's conversation, Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me, which has, it's not so much the whole book, but there's a particular chapter where they talk about physicians and a couple of medical examples of the way we perceive right versus wrong, or that what we're doing makes perfect sense when in fact it might be perfect nonsense.
Wow.
Mistakes Were Made But Not Made By Me. I thought it was Lukianoff, but I think it's maybe Carol Tavris.
It is, yeah. And Elliot Aronson, I actually just reread it because it's the most perfect book you can read for this point in the medical scandal. How they're still managing to self-justify. I think it's fascinating.
Wow, I didn't know about that. Carrie, are you on mute?
I was going to say that might run into, like, there's an interesting, quite a nice segue to someone asked, do you think the New York Times will ever cover this story? So just that kind of, there's just certain segments of our society that are just locked into this. And we see there's these information silos. Like when I went to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the booth, there were doctors who just had never heard of, pediatricians who had never heard of detransitioners. So a lot of siloing of information. So I wonder what everyone thinks about, will the New York Times ever?
Well, I'll start off with
WPATH Files. Yeah.
I'll start off with my bit, and then I'm very keen to what everybody else thinks.
Okay.
Of the almost infamous at this stage New York Times. I was very interested in what Helen Joyce, who had worked in The Economist, had to say, because she saw how slow it was to change The Economist's stance on the Iraqi war. And they kind of knew that they were going to reverse, but it seemed to take them 10 years to do this reverse. And it basically, people had to retire, people had to leave, that they didn't, it didn't happen. It wasn't a moral, we have got it wrong. It was enough people have left that we can slide the other direction. It was very depressing and incredibly instructive and frightening about how a newspaper can reverse. I've seen, we've kind of got our own little microcosm of the New York Times with the Irish Times. It's incredibly similar, same prestige and same kind of capture. And I noticed that they were printing an awful lot of readers' letters. And I thought that's an interesting and quite shrewd way to reverse the ship. It's like, it's not us, it's the public, if you follow me. And so I think that gives them an opportunity. If you could continue with our letter writing, arguably that will give them an in if they're ever going to move. You look mad to speak, Mia. Am I right?
Well, if you read the comments, whenever the New York Times does an article on this issue, either way, the comments are overwhelmingly in our favor. People do not support this. Even New York Times readers do not support what's happening to children. So the New York Times, they have published some things. They haven't touched WPATH Files yet, but they've dipped their toe into the water many times on this issue. And so they're trying, they're writing their course, but Helen is right, it's going to be very, very slow. And because the Pamela Paul one, right? What was that amazing piece that Pamela Paul did? That's her name, not so long ago. We think they may have used up their gender critical quota for some time, and they can't publish something else maybe so soon afterwards. So I don't know if they're going to pick this one up.
Yeah. Do you want to speak, Laurie? Are you gonna?
Yeah, Stella, there's a question
Oh, yeah.
maybe you can help me with, because it's quite relevant to materials that Genspect's made available. I'm going to read it out. I'm getting a lot out of this experience. I'm a teacher in Ontario, and we are told by our school board that we have to lie to parents if their child wants to change their pronouns, get binders, packers, or change their names. I don't want to lie to parents, and I don't think we should teach children to keep secrets with other adults. I feel like we are lying to children, and as teachers, we should be sharing the truth. Some of what we are expected to say and go along with is not the truth. This person's also written, I am not sure what approach to take at school. Do I stand my ground and potentially become isolated, or just go along with this dangerous kind of policy in education? So I wanted to read that because I know a lot of materials were made available or have been made available. I don't know about for the teachers, though. It was more for the parents to take to the schools.
No, we have some Genspect. If you look in the resources, we have a Canadian school policy, which is a really hefty document, and it's really well researched. It's a beautiful piece of reading. I didn't write it, piece of writing. And we do talk about things like why it's not appropriate to keep secrets from parents in schools, and why it's important to prioritize sex over gender, and how perhaps a third space is really the only option for these children if they've had puberty blockers, and if they have they have a medicalized identity. But you can't really just presume that they could go into the space of the opposite sex. So it's very, very well thought out. We've Canadian one, we've an American one, we've an Irish one, and we also have just general school guidances. I would say that it could be helpful to bring them in as an opener, as a conversation opener. There will be people who don't like it, but also, you can book organizations like Genspect to come and speak to the staff. We tend to speak to the staff, and that's where there's so much more interest. The teachers generally want to teach geography or maths or English, and they have been just absolutely foisted. This gender has been foisted upon them. There'll always be 1, 2, or 3 who are massively keen into it. The rest of them are rolling their eyes, just thinking, I'm a geography teacher. I'm not interested in this. And I've seen plenty of fads come and go. So that's who I'm speaking to when we do give those, and they can be incredibly powerful. Any of those school staff talks can be really a huge amount. Somebody commenting there on the New York Times censoring the amount of comments, that can be a kind of dark comedy, watching the censoring of the comments. Would anybody like to comment any further about the New York Times?
That question, that was from a teacher, right? Asking about whether she was going to speak up. And I'll just say, if you're listening, I think you'll regret it every single day of your life if you don't, because these are your children, and if you don't do something, that your children are going to be put into a dangerous situation. So that it's the right thing to do, but you're going to have to sacrifice something. But if you do it and you stand your ground and you refuse to get bullied, then you'll enter this entirely different world that is so much better than the one you came from. It seems really scary and it seems really dangerous, and you will have to sacrifice, but I can attest that it's much better on the other side.
Can I just back that up, Eithan? I'm really glad you said that, because I've worked over the years so often. I started off non-anonymous. I've always been out. But I think the water is much warmer out than in. I think it's very scary when you're in and you're not out of the closet as such with your views. You're frightened. You read these stories, your eyes get bigger and you get scareder and scareder. And then when you come out and you have your name and you just think,
yeah.
Amount of people who say it's better. Yeah, I did lose things, but actually it's easier. It's mentally significantly better when somebody comes out. I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah, because you have to think that, every day for the rest of your life, you're going to have to look yourself in the mirror. And if you think that you didn't do the right thing at this moment, then it's going to be very hard. And that eats away at people. And there's no way to avoid that. So,
and there is a lot of people on the other side waiting with support, with connections, with introductions, with kind of invitations that you won't have anticipated. There is a lot of warmth on the other side.
Yeah, like you wouldn't even imagine. It's amazing, really. Yeah.
Go on, Mark.
Well, I just want to say that Eithan has all sorts of moral authority to say what he just did, because he took a very brave step, and he now has the United States Department of Justice after him. There was an earlier question we didn't really get to, which is, what would the impact of a change in administration next year be like? We didn't really touch that. Nobody really knows, but you look at the staffing of the Biden White House, the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services is transgender, but is a very militant person and very much devoted to pushing changes in policy through the military, the Veterans Administration, you name it. Not sure what Trump would do. I suspect he might reverse that just because it was Biden who did it, and that would kind of fit his modus operandi. But for whatever reason, I do think that would change things. We certainly see some changes elsewhere, like I believe it's in Alberta right now, has a political leader who is going to change the standards for gender medicine. Likewise, in the Netherlands, one of the newly powerful parliamentary members says, we've got to do a systematic review. We're tired of being known as the place that invented the Dutch protocol. So political shifts do matter.
Yeah. And right. And who holds the policy keys, it really matters. But to, pick up on what was said about ethics, that is how I felt during the opioid crisis, the run up of, the pressure to prescribe. To me, it was very clear. I just knew it was wrong. I could never look myself in the mirror, and knowing I would be contributing to someone's continued addiction or decline or overdose. And living with doing something unethical has a huge cost. So for me during the opioid crisis, it was never a question that I was going to say no. What was so hard was that when I said no, there were not a lot of people supporting me. And that was a huge shock. That was the first time I thought, oh my gosh, wait, wouldn't the administration of the hospital want me to be saying no? But then I found out, well, no, because their metric is a result on a pain scale, not the patient, and that was really, really, eye-opening to me. And that was depressing and hard to work through, to figure out how to find your place to practice medicine ethically and in a satisfying way. I think that's, a separate conversation, a big challenge for the culture of medicine, which, is part of, I think, the root causes why we would be susceptible to further scandals, because physicians are atomized or they're hospital employees and just different things. But the ethics, you have to realize, it is better to be consistent with ethics, and there are wonderful people on the other side, supporting in this situation, wonderful people supporting doing the right thing, and we just need to keep banding together and speaking out so people know that we're here.
Yeah. I see Dr. Gillian Spencer makes the comment. She's no more than yourself, Eithan Haim. She spoke out in her hospital in I know I'm going to get it wrong, Australia rather than New Zealand, I think. She said, I was shocked at my hospital. I thought we were all there to do the right thing. I think I found out that most people are there to pay their mortgage. I never thought people would cross the line of child protection. I think people slip. It's kind of, that analogy about the boiled frogs, and it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. It's like you know what I mean? They kind of slip and slip and slip, and suddenly they're leading a very unethical life if the culture of the hospital is unethical. So it really matters. But these are, well-paid doctors who are, I presume, well-paid, but certainly they're in positions of extreme responsibility. It is, very looked up to this day. Is there any other questions that jump out of people? I like this one, of course I would. I'm a psychologist thinking about the applicability of the old concept of a folie à deux, which is a shared delusion among two or more people. This seems to be a good example of a large-scale delusion about the normality of this phenomenon and the medicalizing of a psychological and sociological problem. I think of, Lisa Marciano wrote that amazing paper way back in 2017 about the Pied Piper, and how the Pied Piper is a true story from the 13th century in the village of Hamelin in, I think, Denmark or somewhere. And we never found out what happened, but some man came and took all the children, and the children left the town. And this extraordinary mass delusion that has occurred, and we've learned it time and again, the Stanley Milgram kind of experiments, people fall in with the way of thinking. There's not that many, and as far as I can see, it's about 10 to 15% of people who go against the crowd. Everybody else just goes with it. And then that 10 or 15 are arguing which way to go. Some are going one way and some are going the other. It's frightening, but I think this is a mass delusion. I think this is it's not the first and it's not the last that I've lived through. What do anybody else think that?
Yeah, I think it's like the story of the human condition, because we've seen it so many times. It's more of like, when has the human race in our society acted responsibly? And there's been times where we've really gotten it right. But of course, these good times lead to weak people, and then weak people lead to bad times. But I think that the first step is just understanding that what this really is, that this is like this mass delusion. And if you can't acknowledge that, then you can't acknowledge the steps that have to be taken to reverse it, because for the average person, it seems so far-fetched what's going on. I mean, like it just, through the nature of my case, I would talk to some donors in the conservative movement, and you would think that they would be knowledgeable about what's going on, but they have no idea. And these are people who are really plugged in, but like they're not even aware that this whole thing is going on, because it's so crazy. So like the first step is acknowledging what's happening. It's crazy to see that people who you think would know don't even know.
And could you remind people just about your case? Because we have quite a few people listening on Twitter and on YouTube, and just in case anybody who doesn't know you, just to...
Yeah, I blew the whistle on Texas Children's Hospital because they had lied about their quote-unquote gender-affirming care program. They said they shut it down. They didn't. I exposed it with the journalist named Christopher Rufo. A month later, on the day of my graduation, the federal agents came to my apartment and informed me I was under criminal investigation. So then after that, we experienced the full extent of the corruption within the Department of Justice. So now, I decided to go public because the corruption was so severe, and we're actually pursuing an investigation into them. So that's our goal, is to hold these people accountable to the greatest degree possible.
Good for you. Good for you. Do you want to come in on something, Carrie? I see a question. Is there something you want to come in?
I just think that's amazing, and you should be applauded. And you're the kind of doctors we need coming into the system. So thank you for doing that.
But I will say that I guarantee you there's probably hundreds of people, dozens of people listening to this who are in the same position, right? Like they can do the same thing because they know something's going on at their hospital that's like very criminal or very unethical. And all they have to do is send a couple emails, get in touch with someone, and the whole thing blows up. I mean, hopefully they don't get criminally investigated. That sucks. but there's good ways to do it. So, and if anyone does need to, just email me. Yeah.
That's what astonished me, Eithan, because I remember when we had you on the podcast and you said you were writing emails for something like 6 months before you found us as a community. You know what I mean? You were really eager to do this and you weren't getting anywhere. And we all think that we're so ready for all this. Am I right? It was something like 6 months you were writing.
Yeah. 5 months, 5.5 months. It's like this world. It's like what Laura and Mark were saying, where it's like you have these like young people controlling the nature of medicine, like kind of like the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s, that like we feel so atomized that we feel like there's no world out there that can possibly exist. And then even when you start reaching out, it's hard to even get a story out there, It's
amazing. We're in our own echo chambers. Seeing one comment, it reminds me of a comment I'll tell you in a second. One person says, until hearing this webinar, I would think it was naive to believe people don't know about detransitioning. If you can transition, you can detransition. I always knew that. I don't understand the cognitive dissonance behind these doctors, but I will call my doctor only because you persuaded me to. I'll call tomorrow. Thank you. Please do.
Oh, that's great. That was the response to my response, I think, because somebody had posted and I was privately answering. That's good news. Thank you. You do that.
And I want to back that up because I remember I was studying, I was doing a course. I'm always doing courses. And the professor, I said something, blah, blah, blah. And I said, detransition. And he went, you could hear him. And he skipped a beat and he said, I know about transitioning, but detransitioning. And he said it in front of everybody. And I was like, seriously, we forget people. He had literally never heard of it until that moment. And I was astonished that he hadn't heard of it. I was literally astonished. So you wouldn't know, really.
Yeah. And again, when we went to the American Academy of Pediatrics, had a booth, I mean, there were so many pediatricians with such a great response. They wanted to learn, but they had only most of them had the whole like, well, I refer to a gender clinic and doesn't this, help kids decrease suicide? So when we talked with them and shared the information, there's misdiagnosis, there's comorbidities not being addressed. We had 150 books we passed out, some of Stella's books, Time to Think, Parents with Inconvenient Truth About Trans. This whole world they weren't even aware of. And like I said, a few pediatricians had never heard of detransitioners, pediatricians who are referring patients to gender clinics. So yeah.
But of course they wouldn't have, because they age out of care. Like the pediatricians don't see them after 18.
I guess maybe it's because I practice emergency medicine. And so obviously it's like the world of where people are there because things are going wrong, and for other reasons that are non-emergent. But to think when you practice medicine that you would think that there's some entity where you're doing something to a patient and there's never like an adverse effect or
an outcome measured, maybe.
Like that they change, like just that it's disconnected from how everything else is in medicine. I feel like that's the part that's hard to understand, right?
If it can treat you, if it can help you, of course, if it can harm you,
right.
Yeah,
right.
Very good point.
Well, and I've always said the onus should be on the intervention, not on proving that the intervention is harmful. This happens also with the safer supply opioid thing, where you're just going to start throwing hydromorphone tablets out into the community because they're all being sold because they're not strong enough anyway to replace the fentanyl that people are using. That's the intervention. The intervention, if there's a chance that it's harmful, which we know there is because we've already done the opioid crisis once, we don't need to do it again, then the onus should be on the interventionists first. Because you're taking a let's call it a neutral or relatively healthy community and you're intervening in that population. It makes no sense. The whole, it turns medicine inside out and basically dismantles the the vows that we take.
Well, yeah, it's Bertrand Russell's chocolate teapot, circling around the earth. You know what I mean? You you've got to prove that it doesn't. You know what I mean? The onus of proof is on the person who's, yeah, I get it. And before we finish, we're going to finish up in a couple of minutes. So make sure if you've any last points around the WPATH files, around ethics, around being a doctor in this world. But I just want to, because I think it's a very interesting point. Somebody has asked, is there any studies about what happens if a natal female goes on and off testosterone, like 1 year on, 1 year off? Would it be better or worse for the body than being on T all the time? I want to point out a couple of things. There's a lot to be gained from, I forget the name of that book. It's about the German women who.
Faust Gold.
Yeah,
Faust Gold. It's right behind me.
I have it there, yeah. Faust Gold is quite interesting about, testosterone on females, and it's very objective. Stats for Gender is the person to contact. Like, she works for Genspect, and Stats for Gender is its own Twitter account now as well. But certainly she's very enthused by, I work with her. We look for things to study to get the stats on, if you follow me. So you go and haunt us and we'll go and try and get the stats. But it's a good point, because I think more and more it's like it's become a recreational drug. Myself and Sasha were talking the other day that there was, this girl at a party offered testosterone and took testosterone at the party. It's like took her friend, you know what I mean, drug. It's like it's become something that's become just a cultural drug. So there's going to be an awful lot of on and off, on and off. I'd rather on and off than on all the time, personally. And I think on and off means there's some sort of movement happening, but the doctors might tell me better, because I don't know.
Well, yeah, none of it should be abused, but it does, to me, I've talked about that too. This feels like a subset of what's going on is a new class of drug of abuse, for examples you highlighted, and that there's already a lot of street selling of the medicines, and then just sort of doping to kind of get an effect to get high, which is why I think prescription drug monitoring is sort of the ethical thing to do, in my opinion. It might, but I think there's an element of this that is here to stay in terms of a drug of abuse situation. I'm curious what the other folks think.
It strikes me as odd that testosterone would be used in this way as like a drug of abuse at a party, because at least the traditional party drugs make you feel good and you can like dance and have a good time, but like what testosterone does is just make you grow hair and lower your voice.
In
that
a month.
seems like a major bummer,
And it's kind of a bonding, I think, between them.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I imagine, but it's how crazy things have become that is a bonding thing that people do at parties. Just blows my mind.
Me too.
Well, once upon a time, we could understand transgenderism, as they called it then, as a group of men who wanted to be as female as possible, or vice versa. But they were still working within a sort of a sex binary. We now have a lot of people declaring a non-binary status, or they're on some gender journey, and they have what WPATH calls embodiment goals. And there are people who will tell you, I want testosterone to give me a deep voice, but not a beard, or vice versa. Or, yeah, I want breast surgery, but we'll leave the genitals alone. So they can wind up in all sorts of different ways, because it is the consumerist model. There's a sort of a Chinese menu, and you choose what you want.
Wow. That's
And
phenomenal.
it's such a good point, because you see, like, when things start going off the rails in these conversations in the WPATH files, that conference, that's when they bring up the embodiment goals, right? When people are like, oh, well, I don't want to be necessarily male or female. I just want to this attribute or that attribute. So it's the exact opposite of what they do, is then create some pseudoscientific, jargon to justify their, movement forward in a very irresponsible way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's frightening, really, what's happening. There's one last question. You might know the answer, Mia. Is there any Dutch clinicians left in WPATH? I think Thomas Steensma is still in it, is it?
I assumed that most of the original ones were still in there. Is the WPATH member search back up?
You know what I think? I think it's important just to distinguish that the WPATH files, a lot of the content was from the listserv, right? Which is like, if people know what a listserv is, it's a group of, usually, I'm familiar with listservs as a groups of medical professionals who, provide support to each other and share cases and issues. And so the WPATH listserv, the impression would be that that's what it is, a clinical listserv. But in fact, if I've ever seen any of the Dutch, I mean, I've met De Vries and Steensma, but I don't remember ever seeing them post or respond. But I have seen the odd, like maybe a social worker or a mental health counselor or somebody with experience of their own who's posting, because there's a lot of people with lived experience who participate in the listserv as an expert because they have the lived experience, and that's assumed to be expertise, which again is what we see with opioids as well.
Yeah, and a listserv is basically a place where members can go to, a platform for members to go to speak to each other. What was I going to say? Yeah, but if you were a clinician with any credibility and you saw the WPATH files come out and you read Mia's report, I think most people would say, yeah, it's time to get out of Dodge City here, I think. Arguably. We better finish it at this. Unless anybody wants to make a last comment, you're very welcome to if you want. Some lovely, great kind of numbers again this week. There's nearly 700 in the Twitter space and 100 in the YouTube, and another 120, 116 in the webinar. So it's good turnout. Thank you very much for everybody for coming. Next week we're going to have the lovely Eliza and Mondegreen and the writers, because Mia, so many people comment on how beautifully written your report is. Really beautiful. It really does reflect very well on your writing skills. So it's going to be a different take on it next week. Does anybody want to say anything last just before we finish? Anything last to say about the WPATH files or anything? Just unmute yourself if you want.
I think too, the way the WPATH files were written, especially because it was such a big file, there was so much to cover. That's one thing that really stood out, was that how amazingly it was put together. Because it would have been so easy for that to just get lost. So I think it's amazing you were on this conference, because you're like a legend. In like the future, when they write books about this, there's going to be like a whole chapter on the WPATH files. It's going to be like Mia Hughes, tell the rest of the story. It's amazing. So
thank you. That's lovely of you to say.
It's so true. And I wanted to just plug, like, Genspect's Twitter handle is going to every day post, just go through systematically each file, each vignette, and post it one a day, because there is so much there, and it's just important to make sure the information is out there. So look at Genspect's Twitter handle, because we're going through it every single day.
And when you're tired of looking at what not to do, you can mosey on over to the new NHS documents on the NHS website, right? And start working your way through a possible path out of this. So if people aren't aware of what's happening in Europe and what's happened in the UK, that's very important. Go to the NHS website. The cast review is coming out in a week or two. We have to have some light at the end of this tunnel.
Great point.
Could be very well out by this time next week. So tune in and see us next week. I see somebody's trying to translate the report into Spanish. Please do. We look forward to all the translations. And thank you all very, very much for coming. Thanks to everybody for their questions and all that. And we might see you next week. Another really fascinating, really, really good webinar. Thanks a million.